Hi, everyone. We'll just wait a few more seconds for any last-minute people to join. Okay, I think we're ready to make a start now. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to this RNI webinar on reclassification of products to self-care medical devices. Thanks for making some time this afternoon or morning or evening or wherever you are in the world to join us for this webinar today. It's good to see some familiar names on the call, but for those of you that are new to our sessions, welcome, and I hope you find the presentation helpful. To give you some background on how we structure the presentation, when you registered for the event, you were given the option to ask us a question on the webinar topic. We reviewed this list of questions and created a presentation to best answer those questions, while also providing some context on the topic of self-care medical devices. There were some questions that were not relevant to this particular topic, so we won't discuss it today, but we will still endeavor to respond to you privately afterwards. Before we begin the session, just some basic housekeeping. The session will last for up to 1 hour. Please keep yourself on mute. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat function, and we'll try to get to it at the end. The session will be recorded, and you will be able to download a copy of the recording later today. Okay, so the presenters today are myself. I'm Keval at the top there, and we also have Manalena, who will jump in to present some sections as well. For those of you who have not worked with us before, we are RNI Consulting, part of Product Life Group. RNI is a regulatory, scientific, and medical affairs consulting firm specializing in the consumer health, nutrition, and beauty industries. We have a team of 16 consultants within our department, covering all aspects of product development and registration globally of food, nutrition, health, and beauty products. So a quick overview of the presentation today. We'll firstly start by introducing the topic of self-care medical devices. We'll then talk about the impact of reclassification of products to self-care medical devices. And finally, we'll cover the process for reclassification. During the presentation, we'll be giving a few examples and case studies just to drill home some of the ideas. So to begin, I think it's valuable to understand the concept of self-care. So the World Health Organization defines self-care as the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. And as you can see from the diagram on the right, self-care is a continuum, starting with individual responsibility, making daily choices about lifestyle such as exercise and healthy eating. And as you move along, people can take care of themselves for minor ailments like sore throats and cough. And then next, it's self-management of long-term conditions. At the very end of this continuum is when a healthcare professional is usually involved for the majority of patient care. On the diagram, I have marked where self-care products usually sit in this continuum. So between managing minor ailments to self-management of long-term conditions. So what are self-care products? So self-care products, as the name suggests, are a range of different types of products that sit within this continuum for managing minor health and long-term conditions. They can include things like self-medication, environmental changes, nutrition, hygiene, and lifestyle, just to name a few. On the right-hand side are some examples of self-care products like aromatherapy, body care, feminine products, hair care, relaxation products, muscle and joint pain relief, etc. You'll notice that some of these categories have been highlighted in blue, and the reason for that we'll cover a bit later. But it's really to show that these products may not fit into one classification very easily. In particular, the ones that we've highlighted in blue might actually be a cosmetic product or a healthcare product. So later on, we'll talk about the reclassification of these specific products. Okay, so now we know what the concept of self-care is and what self-care products are. It's probably best next to define what medical devices are. And then afterwards, we'll marry the two concepts together and then go into the topic in a bit more detail. So on the slide is the official definition of a medical device, according to the MDR 2017-745. I won't read the definition verbatim, but the key thing is that medical devices are any article intended by the manufacturer to be used alone or in combination for human beings for one of the following four medical purposes. So there's four medical purposes listed out in the regulation. Finally, a device must have a physical mode of action. That means that it does not have a primary pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic mode of action. In other words, devices must have a mechanical action, like a physical barrier action, such as a film or lubrication, but also things like heat transfer or radiation could be considered mechanical as well. So great, so now we've spoken about the definition of medical device, it's time to marry the two concepts together. So self-care medical devices encompass a diverse range of products for over-the-counter personal use in managing health concerns or promoting well-being without the direct supervision of a healthcare professional. And these devices aid in addressing many mild to moderate health conditions, such as skin conditions, cold and allergy symptoms, pain relief, and more. I usually like to think of self-care medical devices as products that you can easily purchase for yourself from a pharmacy or online. And just really important to note that the medical device regulation does not actually define self-care medical devices as a product category by itself. Instead, you need to know the regulations well and know which parts of the regulations will apply to your device and which parts may be excluded. So here are some things to consider for self-care medical devices. So self-care medical devices are usually substance-based, not always, but a lot of the time they are composed of substances. And this is the physical form of the device itself. So it might be a cream or a gel. It could be a syrup for oral consumption. It could also be sprays for ingesting or in the nose or on the skin. Secondly, self-care medical devices are intended to be used directly by the average well-informed consumer. So think about usability. It should be relatively simple to use the device. To many people, self-care medical devices may be viewed as a consumer product and marketed directly to consumers. So there is usually a lot of branding and advertising surrounding them with lots of different promotional claims. And lastly, self-care devices are usually part of a product family for similar intended purposes. For example, they could be part of a cold and flu product portfolio or a wound management portfolio or a skin treatment portfolio. It's not very common to see the self-care medical device sitting in isolation. So in terms of examples of self-care medical devices, I think just walking to your pharmacy, I'm sure you'll see lots, but here are just a few categories. So the first one is ear, nose, and throat devices. So these would be things like nasal sprays for nasal hygiene, for sinusitis, and for allergy or rhinitis. They could also be in the form of a unidose, which are common for infants, but also this covers things like oral syrups for cough relief. Intimate products would be things like vaginal gels and ovules and pessaries for hydration and healing, but could also include things like lubricants. Digestion, these would be oral capsules or tablets for digestion management or acid reflux, but also for weight management, which is a very borderline case. And then we've got wound management, which includes things like creams and gels for wound healing and barrier protection, ointments for scar prevention, but plasters and patches for warts, calluses, and corns. Dermatology, creams and lotions for a range of different conditions like dermatitis, acne, prevention of skin cancers, but also prevention of infections. Ophthalmology would usually be eye drops for lubricating or flushing out any allergens. Muscle support would be compression bands, elastic bandages, but also topical creams and gels for inducing that hot and cold sensation and relaxing any tension. Oral care could be like toothpaste, and apps are a growing area, such as symptom checkers, for example, or helping to manage a long-term condition. And at the very end, I've put aesthetic devices, which are kind of a new category of devices which do not have an intended medical purpose, but they are still classified as a medical device. So these would be products to enhance your beauty. So self-care devices commonly border other product categories, which you may have noticed by now in a few of the examples I've spoken about. So on the left, we have products for external use, and the most common product categories are cosmetics, medicines, and medical devices. Examples could be things like topical gels and creams for muscle and joint pain, for itching relief, acne, dermatitis, also wound healing products, sunscreens, and head lice products. And on the right-hand side, we have products for internal use. And the three common categories are food supplements, medicines, and medical devices. Examples could be things like prebiotics for gastrointestinal health, products to influence satiety and to make you eat less, but also cough syrups as well. So usually when we deal with the concept of reclassification, it is between these other categories. And as technology improves, there are probably going to be many more examples of some really odd categories beginning to overlap. In terms of complexity of getting self-care products to market by the different categories I spoke about before, medicines are by far the most complex, followed by medical devices, cosmetics, and finally food supplements. And when I talk about complexity, I really mean time to market and the pre-market work required, the level of scientific data required, everything that's required to get the product to market. I know some food supplement manufacturers have invested a lot into clinical and scientific studies and quality management systems. So I'm not discounting that, but I'm just talking about the base level required in order to get the products to market. So just something to keep in mind that if you are looking to reclassify a product from cosmetic or food supplement to a medical device, the amount of work required is more. So why reclassify products to self-care medical devices? Here are just 4 points which I've pulled out. I'm sure there's many more, but these are the 4 main ones, I think. The first one being commercial opportunities. And firstly, regarding new claims. Reclassification to self-care medical devices opens up opportunities for companies to make medical claims that were previously unavailable for their products. For example, a food supplement syrup marketed for general wellness may now be able to make claims for cough relief. And this expanded claim potential can significantly influence a product's marketability and influence to consumers for targeting a specific health condition. It also opens up new distribution channels, such as selling through pharmacy only, which may not have been possible with existing classifications. The second point was to complement a portfolio of existing products. So reclassification allows companies to strategically complement their existing product portfolios with synergistic offerings without the need to develop a brand new product. For example, a company making soap substitutes can reclassify one product to a medical device and allow them to claim on eczema and dermatitis, and therefore, completes their product portfolio. The same could be said for food supplement for digestion, which could be reclassified as a medical device to treat bloating, and therefore completing the product portfolio. The third thing is on new clinical study results. So sometimes manufacturers or even third parties will publish a clinical study on an existing product to show how it treats or manages a medical condition. However, depending on the category the product exists in already, manufacturers could be very limited on how they communicate the study results due to the regulations and restrictions on claims. Reclassification, therefore, may permit the use of clinical studies for making additional claims, adding new intended purposes, and really strengthen the credibility of the product. And the final one I put at the bottom there is regulation changes. So regulatory changes happen all the time, and they could impose new restrictions on ingredients or product types. An ingredient might not be allowed, the dosage might be reduced. And so self-care medical device classification could be a good viable alternative to keep the product on the market. Also, there could be changes to regulations governing health claims, and advertising standards might impact the marketing and promotion of products. And finally, geographical restrictions. If you've got a product that sells as a cosmetic or food product overseas, in Europe, medical device could be a better status in order to keep the same claims and intended purpose. So on the previous slide, it sounds like reclassification is a great thing to do. But with all the positives I mentioned, there is also a lot to consider on the back end as well. And the first one being pre-market. Before even developing the technical documentation for medical devices, you might need to conduct additional preclinical and clinical studies. Some tests may need to be reconducted because they were not performed according to the correct standards. In addition, you also need to be ISO 13485 certified before you even begin the reclassification process. The second point is about registration procedures. The registration procedure is different as well. And depending on the class of device, it might involve a notified body audit, which could add a lot of additional time depending on the notified body you choose and their capacity to audit you. The third thing is marketing. So as I mentioned before, medical devices allow you to make medical claims, but everything that is communicated must be supported by clinical data. So that may restrict you to some extent. For example, if the evidence for use of a product in pregnant and breastfeeding women is limited, then you'll probably have to exclude this population group. Same thing for population age groups like infants. You may not be able to apply the same generic population groups that you may have done in the past because the clinical data is really lacking. Distribution, again, depending on the country, medical devices might be restricted to certain distribution channels only, such as pharmacies. And in certain countries, the taxes might differ as well for these products. And post-marketing, work does not stop once the product is on the market. There is a lot of ongoing requirements to fulfill, such as vigilance and general reporting as well. So the work doesn't end after you've reclassified. You have to make sure you understand and invest in the future processes as well. So each one of these points has a financial and a time cost to consider. So how do you go about the reclassification process? I would always advise that you have a consultant helping you along the way because there is no set way of doing it. It's all very product specific and the context it sits in. However, this is usually the plan we recommend at RNI, and we'll go through each step in the next few slides. But just to quickly go over it and just set the context, the first thing is to understand the regulatory framework and route to market for medical devices. This step will basically set up the basic framework for you to understand the investment and resources needed for medical devices. Self-care medical devices are still medical devices at the end of the day, and the medical device regulation has a lot of requirements even before developing the device, as well as the post-marketing requirements I spoke about before. So take the time to understand the requirements, the framework, so there are no nasty surprises later on. The second thing we would do is qualify the product as a medical device. This step is to confirm that medical device status is actually possible for your product and that you have a strong rationale to support it. The third thing is develop the clinical strategy. Now, it might sound like we're jumping around a bit here, but medical devices are for medical purposes when you qualify the device. So therefore, in order to support the intended medical purpose, you have to ensure that you've got enough clinical evidence to support that. And therefore, understanding the clinical landscape before you begin with the process will really help you understand if it's even possible to create that intended medical purpose, if you're able to make some of the claims you've got, if there's any restrictions to the population, etc. The fourth thing is around product safety, and this is twofold. The first one being clinical safety and the second one being biocompatibility. So again, making sure from a safety perspective, the product can go to market in its current state, or if you need to make any adjustments. Following steps 3 and 4, you should have a good idea of the claims that could be supported, the population groups, precautions, contraindications, warnings, instructions, etc. Step 5 is the gap assessment of the existing technical files. So this is when you can look at all the other technical documents needed to get the medical device approval. And finally, step 6 would be to develop or to reclassify the product. So just focusing now quickly on step 1. So understand the regulatory framework. This is a rough schematic of the route to market for medical devices. It's very simplified, and each step may involve lots of other different aspects, but I think it's good to explain it from a high level first. Firstly, make sure that you are ISO 13485 compliant and certified. This is the mandatory QMS procedure that should be in place before any development of medical devices occurs. After that, it's qualification, and that's what we will talk about on the next slide. Following this, the device needs to be classified, so class 1, 2A, 2B, or 3. The next step would be to design and validate the device and conduct all the necessary tests and collect all the necessary data to build a technical file. Following that, it's writing the technical file, preparing the declaration of conformity, and finally going through a notified body to get CE marked if applicable. And only after that can the device be placed in market, and you can follow up with all the post-marketing work. So take the time, if you haven't worked with medical devices before, take the time, understand this process. So again, there's no nasty surprises once you start. The second thing was to qualify the product as a medical device. So when qualifying a product as a medical device, there are 3 things that you should consider. The first one being the intended purpose, the second, the mode of action, and the third, the presence of substances. The intended purpose of a medical device must be medical, so diagnosis, treatment, etc., of a disease or injury. There are some exceptions, like the Annex 16 devices, which are devices without a medical purpose, but it's not very common for that to apply to self-care devices. The second point is the mode of action, which should be physical and not pharmacological, immunological, metabolic. And the principal mode of action must be based on state-of-the-art scientific literature and explained in this technical file. Basically, references to performance or safety data is not sufficient alone to support its mode of action. You need to have objective data to show how the device works. And finally, substances. And basically, the medical device regulation bans certain substances from being allowed in a medical device. And the example I have there is of viable organisms, which used to be allowed under the old medical device directive. Here's 2 examples. I picked 2 examples, one for an external product and one for an internal product, to demonstrate how changes to the intended purpose could change the classification of the product. In both these cases, the mechanism of action of the products are exactly the same. They don't change once you've changed a category. But as you can see in the first example, which is a syrup containing plant extracts, it's a food supplement for general health benefits. However, if we change the intended purpose to treating cough by providing a viscous solution that coats the throat surface, it pushes it into medical device territory. Note I also put medicine or traditional herbal medicine here because it's very common for herbal ingredients to have medical properties, which would not fulfill the definition of a medical device. And in a few minutes, Manalina will talk a bit more about these cases. And on the right-hand side, we have a sunscreen, which is traditionally a cosmetic. However, the minute we change the intended purpose for maybe preventing skin cancer by blocking UV rays, it can become a medical device. So really interesting to show how the mode of action is the same, substances are the same, but just changing the intended purpose can change the category altogether. We had a question about apps and if they could be considered self-care medical devices as well. The answer is yes, they could be. The new medical device regulation has some specific rules for medical device software, including the introduction of a classification rule. So apps could be a whole presentation by itself, but to simplify it on one slide, the most important thing is the intended purpose. So healthcare apps for wellness and well-being or lifestyle, which directly or indirectly maintain or improve the health of people, would not be considered a medical purpose. So some examples could be education apps, monitoring health and fitness, medical education apps, databases, etc. So in some cases, in our experience, we've seen some apps where the functionality begins to creep into medical device territory, especially when they begin to offer personalized recommendations in relation to a medical condition. So be careful, be very careful, and also be careful when you're dealing with apps that are connected to a hardware device as well. And I put at the bottom that symptom checkers and clinical calculators could potentially be borderline cases as well. So if you're stuck, speak to us, speak to a consultant, and I'm sure they're able to help you. Just going to pass over to Menelina now.
Yes, let's have now a more depth knowledge and awareness of what substance-based devices are and which rules navigate and classify the products. So substance-based devices commonly are those that composed of substances or of combination of substances. What the classification commonly takes into account is the site of the application of the medical device product and where the intended action and intended purpose of the medical device performed in the human body or on the human body. Key considerations is that, as Keval said before, not permitted substances are viable biological materials and organisms or viable animal tissues or cells coming from human or animals. Now classifications rules that take effect are Rule 14, that commonly is for substance that if used separately or alone can be medical substances and considered to have a pharmacological action. So those substances have an auxiliary action in the medical device intended purpose, and those medical devices are classified directly to class 3. And which other rule is really critical is Rule 21, which is a new classification rule in medical device regulation. And this rule speaks about the absorption and the local dispersion of the medical device when it is introduced into a body orifice or applied to the skin. This classification rule classifies the medical devices at minimum as a Class 2A. We are going to see a bit more details later after. Rule 19 now is very critical and is commonly recently taken effect and notified bodies requires most information about this is about the nanomaterials that could be presently in the medical device intentionally. This means that the manufacturer is aware of the presence of the nanomaterials in the medical device. We have also the possibility nanomaterials to be presented in the medical devices coming from the manufacturing process or from the raw materials. That is the unintentional presence of those nanomaterials. And sometimes notified bodies want the manufacturer to examine this possibility through the whole processing and manufacturing of the device. What is important to say in Rule 19 is that in case we have really high internal exposure, so this means that the nanomaterial can reach the systemic exposure, the systemic circulation. This is really high possibility to classify the product as Class 3 according to this rule. So many times it is necessary to perform absorption, distribution, and generally to examine the kinetic of nanomaterials on the surface that we are going to apply the medical device. Let's see here some examples of Rule 21 and which class can be under the intended purpose and the application side. If we are going to apply the medical device into the human body or via body orifice, and we know that the combination of substances or the substance are going to be systemically absorbed, then the product directly is Class 3. If we also have a medical device that their intended purpose is going to be in stomach or in lower gastrointestinal tract, and maybe their own products or metabolic products are going to be systemically absorbed, then also the product will be classified as Class 3. Now, if we have some medical devices that are going to apply to the skin or are going to apply it in the nasal or a cavity, like pharynx for, let's say, syrups, as we spoke before, and the intended purpose is going to be act on those cavities and application sites, then the class will be 2A. Otherwise, we have the possibility of class 2B. And on the right column, we have some examples, and we can have a look of like fat absorbers on can be class 3. Some substance-based formulation for skin treatment can be class 2A, or some oral cough treatments achieving their intended purpose in the oral cavity or the pharynx can be 2A. Some other examples for 2B classification can be eye drops for hydration, let's say, gel for vaginal moisturization, and some medical devices that are orally administrative and can be for diarrhea treatment or for obesity, like glucomana or fructooligosaccharides. As we said before, also herbal substances it is very common to be presented in medical devices. These herbal substances can be essential oils or plant extracts, and the purpose entering the formula of the medical device can be for flavoring purposes or an auxiliary action to the principal mode of action. So we have a separation here in case that the principal intended action of the medical devices can be by mechanical mode of action. So we don't have pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic action. And that can fit to the medical device regulation. And we need to have a justification that the herbal substance has no any pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic action in the whole medical device intended purpose. In case now we have a medical substance that has an auxiliary action to the principal intended action of the product, then we should provide a justification that has an auxiliary action and not an active compound. So then Rule 14 takes place, and then the medical device will directly be classified in class 3. Here, there is also common that a lot of herbal substances extracts are classified by EMA as traditionally medical substances, and EMA have been assessed those extracts and herbal preparations and have been finally assessed and published in EMA website. What is interesting here is that manufacturing can have directly access to those data and can easily see the claims and the indications of the medical action of those herbals, and also the posology and the target population that are intended to be used. For example, the data that usually are gathering for the traditional use are not so common to be included in really young ages for infants, let's say, or for young children, as we don't have collect enough data, because traditional substance and traditionally medicines in EMA should have relevant data for the clinical effect and safety more than the 50 years or 30 years ago in the EMA territory. That means that we need a lot of data to prove the safety and the efficacy. Sometimes it's not common to have a safety part, but most clinical part of those herbals. So we need those evaluation so to check if there is any pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic action compared to the medical device intended purpose. And of course, to check in the clinical evaluation if their posology and the level of the presence of in the formulation of those substances can be compared to the posology in the European herbal monographs. In addition, except of the comparing the pharmacological effect and the dose of one substance, there is a possibility to have a synergy of the effect if we have a combination of substances in the medical device. So even if we have, let's say, quite lower the percentage in the medical device compared to the monograph, if we have more than 2 or 3 substances, then the total pharmacological action of those substances can take effect, and then the product will be rejected like a medical device and can be qualified as a medicine. It is very common to have this kind of substances in a medical device that take care of the ENT disease, like allergies or respiratory tract general infections. And there is very critical to know the action of herbal substances in those medical devices. Can be only for flavoring or can have an auxiliary action to the first principal mode of action of our medical device. Here are some examples that those products are herbal medicines and cannot be qualified as medical devices. For example, we have a cough syrup that the composition can be Cetraria islandica and Malva sylvestris. Both of these substances are qualified as herbal substances coming with anti-inflammatory properties by EMA, so have been classified as medical substances. So from this part, we cannot use them in posology used in the same indication in EMA monograph. Also, we have some wood healing ointment with a composition with echinacea and with claims like a treatment of small superficial wounds. This also cannot be qualified as a medical device. In addition, the last example is with vaginal ovules that they use as composition chamomilla and lavandula. Those two also substances have been classified as medical substances by EMA. So regarding this, we cannot say that the intended purpose can be reached mechanically as medical device regulation requires. So we need to classify those as medicines. Here is a small graph where we can see where Rule 21 applies and where it does not apply. For example, we first examine if the device, of course, is composed of substances or not. If yes, then we try to investigate if it will be into the human body via body orifice or applied to the skin, and if they are going to be absorbed orally, absorbed or locally dispersed in the human body. If the answer is yes, then we proceed to the next step and to see if these products can be systemically absorbed in order to achieve the intended purpose of the device. So we have class 3 in this case, if we have yes. If we have no, then we apply to the lowercase classification, which could be class 2A, according to this rule. And we can follow this diagram to see actually how are going to be classified the medical device according to this pathway. Here are also some examples where Rule 21 can apply. Let's say we have a device that is hypertonic nasal spray. Then, yes, the Rule 21 can apply because we should examine the absorption and dispersion of this medical device in the nasal cavity. So commonly, these kind of devices are classified as class 2A. Now, in case we have some ultrasound gels that is is the gels that are using in during the ultrasound. So in this case, because of the physicochemical characteristic of this gel, then the answer is no, because it is not possible to be absorbed by the skin due to the physicochemical characteristics. So it is directly wiped off from the skin, and then this rule cannot be applied. Now, if we have headless treatment, which is the products that are applied to the skin, the head, and the scalp, in case to eliminate the leash, if we know that the molecules of those substances are too large to penetrate the skin, that might the Rule 20 cannot be applied. But in generally, also there are some other products that includes herbal substances. So in this case, because also the folicates are sites on the skin where high absorption can be done. So we should examine the case that absorption distribution through the folices can be done. We have also the moisturizing cream for skin, and in this case, yes, Rule 21 can be applied. And we have Class 2A for those products that are applied on skin or in nasal or oral cavity. What is important now, if we are going to move forward to the clinical strategy, is for a manufacturer to have really set out a systematic and planned process for the clinical evaluation of the product. To do so, we should generate, collect, and make the analysis of all the clinical data that covers the product. In order to do that, what we examine are the claims and the intended purpose of the whole medical devices to reach the clinical performance that we want. Let's have an example here of a nasal spray for allergic rhinitis. It's really critical to have the correct claims and the correct intended purpose in order to achieve the clinical benefit and the clinical performance in the design and the conception generally of the general safety and the performance requirements setting out in MDR regulation. So the claims and the intended purpose are critical in order to evaluate the whole performance of the product. In order also to make the clinical evaluation and to reach in conclusions if we have a product that have benefit and clinical benefit compared to the intended use, we should really examine and have dedicated analysis of all these separate steps in order to reach to the conclusions according to the performance that can be set it out in clinical evaluation plan and clinical evaluation report, and after to the post-marketing clinical follow-up. And also the safety is really critical that can be established in the biological evaluation report. Now we have three main clinical strategies according to medical device regulation. Those three clinical strategies are those that are shown here. The first is when we gather data from the actual device, we perform clinical studies and we follow the ISO 14555, which is dedicated to the clinical trials and the good practices in clinical investigation. In order to do so, we should make a protocol, clinical protocol that should be aligned with the intended use, the target population, the treatment duration, and the posology. Because the notified bodies are really stuck on the clinical protocols and the comparison between the claims and the instructions of use of the device. So everything should be aligned. So the results from those clinical investigation can be really useful for the final performance of the device. If we don't want to go to the path 1 and to determine and investigate the actual device, then we have the possibility to make a comparison with equivalent device. The possible here, the difficulty here is that the criteria setting out in equivalence are really strict. So the equivalence device should be really similar and equivalent in some technical, biological, and clinical characteristics. In order to do so, manufacturers sometimes require to perform tests in order to establish those equivalents, in order to find that the formula and the design of the equivalent device can be exactly the same with the actual device. If we have collected data from the equivalent device from the literature, and we have established the equivalence, then we can use those clinical studies and clinical evidence for the performance of the device. And third, we have the well-established technology that is something we can use in order to justify the performance of the device. This path is a bit complicated. It is we gather literature from the state-of-the-art data, and this applies to relatively simple medical devices, and the generic device group should have a well-known clinical performance. If we have a device that has a high evolution, unfortunately, we cannot use this path. And if the device if the data we have and the device and the well-established technology we are based on do not have a long history on the market, also we cannot use this kind of path. Now, if we are going to pass in the establishment of the product safety, some really critical information we should gather are the intended use of the medical device, the raw materials, the manufacturing materials, and what are extracted from the devices afterwards, the quality of the manufacture of the substances we use in the formulation, and the quality and manufacturing of the actual device and the whole manufacturing process. Also, what is important to know is the risk profile of the substances we use. Here are a summary of what are the considerations we're looking for in order to establish the safety. We are looking for any nanomaterials that the manufacturer is aware of in the composition. As we said before, Rule 21 applies, and we examine the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion of the substances and the whole actual device. We're taking under consideration also the toxicological points that are critical, and we know these endpoints if we take into account the contact time with the user or the patient, the contact surface, so we can estimate what toxicological endpoints we should be evaluated, and we are going to see a bit later. Also, the target population, the posology, are really critical for the whole evaluation. If we say we have infants or young children and vulnerable population like a pregnant woman, we should take this under consideration and to make the whole assessment dedicated to this population. In addition, posology is very important in order to set out if there is any risk or any side effect, or if we exceed the and we have an overdosage. Quality specification, packaging, and stability are also under evaluation during this whole biological evaluation of the product. Here is a summary of what we spoke about and the regulatory requirements that set out in MDR regulation. We should examine the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, the local tolerance, the toxicity profile of each substance, and possible interaction with other devices, medicinal products, or other maybe substances. And any, of course, potential adverse effect that can be after the whole evaluation that we should perform. In order to evaluate now this, we should know if some more toxicokinetic studies are required or we have enough data from the literature or from manufacturer. We should perform a chemical characterization in the medical device in order to find any unidentified substance or maybe an extractable and leachable substance that coming from the whole manufacturing process or maybe from the package or label. So we should be aware for any potential risk from those unidentified substances. In addition, we should make clear what are the active substances in the medical device and what are the biocompatibility studies are necessary to be performed in order to collect more data on safety. Here is the table coming from the ISO 10993 part 1, which set out what are the endpoints that should be evaluated according to the conduct and the duration of the medical device that we applied on the skin or in mucosal membrane or in compromised surface. So we should be aware of this table so we know the biocompatibility studies or the data that can be retrieved from the literature. It is also very important to know if the device, according to the duration of the treatment or the cumulative duration of the device that will be applied into the skin, if it is going to be limited, prolonged, or long term. This also applies to the toxicological assessment of the whole device. That is really necessary step in the whole biological evaluation and can determine if there is a risk or not. Here is a table extracted from the ICH-M7 for the pharmaceuticals and can be applied the same for medical devices, according to ISO 10993. This ISO for medical devices has also the toxicological part, which is the part 17, and set out the pathway where the toxicologist can make the risk analysis and to determine and to conclude if there is any risk based on this analysis according to chemical characterization of the product and any maybe potential impurity that can be found in the medical devices. Here, I don't know if you are familiar with toxicology and the risk assessment. There are some values that we use when we perform the toxicological risk assessment, and is based on the toxic profile of the substances that are used in the formula or can be identified or unidentified in the chemical characterization.
Thanks, Annalena. Great. So we've covered steps 1 to 4. Step 5 was the gap assessment of the existing technical data. I thought this was a really good diagram. It basically, let me start again. When you're compiling the medical device technical file, you should refer to Annex 2 and Annex 3 of the medical device regulation. And in the regulation, the structure of the medical device technical file is written nice and in a very orderly manner. However, in reality, the technical file includes lots of different sections that refer to other sections and are backed up by other sections. So the technical file is a dynamic document which evolves with each new piece of information that you add to it. And so compliance with the MDR requires showing the interconnections between the documents in a very coherent manner. So get a consultant to help you to develop this technical file if it's completely new to you. And we always recommend starting with the gap analysis first. So that's where you look at the requirements of Annex 2 and 3 and look at your technical data to see if you've got all the necessary information to build the final technical file in preparation for submission. And finally, the last thing on our diagram was to implement the medical device development or to implement the reclassification process. So I think we've spoken about a lot of these points already, but just to reiterate the main things. The first thing is that ISO 13485 compliance and certification is absolutely mandatory, and this is for quality management systems for medical devices. After you've got this in place, the next step we would recommend is to contact a notified body. That's if your device has been qualified as Class 2A and above. Just remember that notified bodies have limited capacity. So once you contact them, they'll be able to give you a timeline on when they can actually conduct the audit. So this is why we say contact your notified body quite early on, just to help you establish the timeline and to understand how much time you've got to collect the necessary information to build a technical file. The third thing would be to conduct any of the additional tests and to collect the missing information to close the gaps from the gap assessment that we conducted the step before. Then we write in the technical file, finding we submitted to the notified body or competent authority, depending on the class. And once you've done everything correctly, there should hopefully be no non-conformities and you will be granted a CE mark and a device can be placed on the market. So the first three steps of ISO compliance, speaking to notified body and conducting the tests are what take the longest to do. So just make sure that you factor in a good chunk of time at the beginning to make sure you collect all the data, because after that, assembling it and doing the submission is relatively quick. So that's the end of our presentation this afternoon. So I think we're bang on 1 hour. So thank you so much, everyone, for making the time and joining us. If you do have any additional questions that we haven't really answered in this presentation, our email addresses are on the screen, but you can also find our website as well, where we do publish some articles, and also check our LinkedIn page as well, where we post regular updates on what's going on in the industry. So I think we might have some questions that came in, so I'll just quickly stop my screen so I can see them. I don't think we've got any questions, actually. So if there's no questions, then we can probably end the presentation here. But yeah, thank you very much. And the presentation will be sent to you afterwards for your viewing later. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.